In this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of polar molecules. So a polar molecule is a molecule that, as a result of its polar bonds, has an area of the molecule that is slightly negative and another area of the molecule that is slightly positive. So this area of the molecule up here is the negative end, the negative pole, and the area down here we're going to call the positive pole. So basically, this polar molecule has slightly charged ends like a magnet. And an example of a polar molecule would be HCl, because our hydrogen is slightly positive and our chlorine is slightly negative. So there's areas, or a positive pole and a negative pole. A nonpolar molecule, however, could have polar bonds, but the molecule is arranged in a way that there's no positive or negative pole. So a nonpolar molecule looks something like this. Maybe it has a positive here, a negative in the center, and another positive here. The nonpolar molecule has no charges on the ends of the molecule, or no charged areas. Okay, so the difference is the nonpolar molecule has the ends of the molecule have the same charge. So there's no magnet here on the nonpolar molecule. An example of a nonpolar molecule could be carbon dioxide, where you have a positively charged carbon in the middle and two negatively charged oxygens on the end. When we look at where the centers of charges are, the center of positive charge is right here. And the center of negative charge is in the same place, in the middle of the atom. Because basically, the center between the charges on the oxygens is right in the middle of the atom, in exactly the same spot as the positive charge. So this means that there's no areas of charge. So there's not a negative pole and not a positive pole. So it's a nonpolar molecule. So make sure you have this copied down in your notes. And now we'll move on. So just a recap, polarity basically means separation of charge. So you have an area that is positive and you have an area that is negative. It looks like a magnet. So this polarity, that is a separation of charge, can be divided into two types of polarity when we're talking about molecules. One is that bond polarity that we've already talked about. And those polar bonds, depends on the difference in electronegativity. The other type of polarity is molecular polarity. Okay, so those polar molecules depend on not only the electronegativity difference, but also the molecular geometry or the shape of the molecule. Bond polarity only depends on electronegativity difference. Polar molecules depend on both electronegativity difference and molecular geometry. So make sure you've got this copied down in your notes, and we're going to move on. So in order to be a polar molecule, a molecule must meet two criteria. The first criteria is that it must have a polar bond, which means the electronegativity difference is greater than 0.4. The second criteria is that it has a shape that does not cancel out the charges of the polar bond, which basically means that it's not a symmetrical molecule. And because it's asymmetrical, it has an overall direction of charge, which means the shape allows it to actually have a magnet. So make sure you've got this copied down in your notes. And in our next lesson, we're going to do some practice on determining whether molecules are polar or nonpolar.